Testing. I'm so lost. Snare. Testing.
This I put on the pants. Shmuley, I put on the pants. You want to put this on? That way it's secure, you know what you're doing.
Put this in this button, if possible.
Do whatever you gotta do. Stay there? Okay. Okay, welcome everybody. Good evening. If I could just request of you to please put your cell phones on vibrate or off, we would all appreciate it. If you could do that now, in the beginning of the shiur, that would be extra appreciated. I know as Jews it's difficult, but I shall still ask you to do that. Put it on, please, on vibrate or off, and we shall begin. Okay. Okay, first of all, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our new series here on the basics of Emunah, the fundamentals of Jewish faith. I want to begin by thanking a dear friend, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Zilberberg, who both conceived of this idea and made it happen in actuality. So thank you very much to you. We opened the opportunity for people to ask questions. So I received over the last few days numerous questions. I'm going to begin this first lecture by reading to you 4 questions that I received. I chose these 4 because they more or less deal with a common theme, and it's the theme we're going to address this evening, Be'ezer Hashem. Okay, question 1 from a young man living in Williamsburg. By the way, everybody could send in their questions to Emunah at theyeshiva.net. That's Emunah at theyeshiva.net. You don't have to sign your name if you don't want. So it could remain anonymous, and you could sign your name if you want, and if you wish, we shall not share your name. You can ask any questions, and Bli Neder Be'ezer Hashem, we will try to address them, at least as many as possible. Here's question number 1. Does faith in Judaism begin with a logical basis, and then it follows with emunah and trust? Or no, it's flat out emunah, flat out faith? If it does start with logic, where is the line? If it's flat out emunah without a logical basis, how are we supposed to acquire it if we don't have it? What if I don't have this faith? How am I supposed to get it? How does my father expect me to follow him blindly if I'm just not feeling like he? And how do I know I'm not like a Muslim? They also scream faith, faith, faith. On the other hand, if it does start with logic, how can it be required from layman people? Great question. Question number 2. This is from a young man living in Muncie. I am a curious person. I'm very inquisitive. I always ask questions. I always had since I was a child. When I became a teenager, I started to ask my father questions about how we know certain things in Judaism are true. First, he tried answering me, but then it seems like he didn't have an answer. How do I know? At some point, when I started to ask my questions, he said to me, this is apikursis, this is kfira, this is heresy. I told him, Tati, maybe it's just you have nothing to answer, so you call it heresy. He says, no, it's just that these questions a Jew doesn't ask. I told him, so how do you know it's true if you don't have answers to these questions? He said, I don't have to ask questions to know that it's true. So I said to him, Father, but what's the proof? And my father said, I saw miracles by my Rebbe. I tell my father, but I did not see any miracles. He says, I did. I asked my father, when did the miracles stop? Isn't it funny that all of you have all these stories, but the day I was born, all the miracles stopped by all the Rebbes? I must be so evil that when I came into the world, suddenly all the stories stopped. Isn't that fascinating? Who is right, me or my father? Okay. Third question from a young woman living in the West. Why do Jewish people follow all the rules without understanding or even liking them? I think it's very important to live a life that you want and enjoy. If I can't do it with all the rules, what should I do? And why do they all believe all these rules? Anything you believe you can't prove. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a belief. So by definition, belief means that you can't prove it. So if you can't prove it, why do you believe it? Okay, good question. Last question from a middle-aged man who also grew up in Brooklyn. And he says, I find something very paradoxical in the community I grew up in and in the home I grew up in. Whenever I ask a question, what is Judaism? Who is Hashem? Who is God? What is Torah all about? Why do we do all the mitzvahs? They always tell me, no questions. We don't have to know all the answers, we just have to do what God wants. But suddenly, whenever tragedy strikes, they always have answers. Whenever there's pain, they always know why. Isn't it interesting? When it comes to knowing the basics of Judaism, they never know why. When it comes to understand why this one got sick and this one died, they always know why. How did that happen? Could you please explain this? Okay, these are 4 questions that came in through the email from real people. I read them almost verbatim, just with a few grammatical questions, because some of them have a better English than others. By the way, you could write to me in Yiddish. Ich verstehe ein bisschen Yiddish. Ihr könnt auch viele schreiben a zichtigen oder glanzendigen Yiddish oder andere Sprachen. But these were written in English. Okay, these are big questions, and they, I think, bring us right into a fundamental theme that is appropriate to address here in this first and opening lecture on the basics of Emunah. There is, I think, a fundamental mistake that many people, many Jews, have when it comes to the word Emunah and the concept of Emunah. This is not about judging the mistake. We make mistakes. Sometimes the mistake comes because of one factor or another factor, but it's still a mistake. And the mistake is sometimes even in the very translation of the word Emunah, which is faith. Many people translate Emunah as being essentially blind, meaning, I don't know if it's really true. How could I? That's why I have to believe. Belief, by definition, means I believe. I don't know. If I would know, I wouldn't have to believe, as this woman wrote. So by definition, the word faith, Emunah, means I don't know. It may be true, it may not be true. I just believe it. So now you'll ask the person the question, so why do you believe it? And they'll tell you, because it's a mitzvah to believe it. So I'll say, okay, but how do you know that this mitzvah to believe it is true? We don't ask questions. We just believe. But what if you're believing something false? You can't prove it. We don't speak like that. We just believe. In other words, what the person is really saying is, I may not know that it's true actually. In fact, it may be false. But I say that I believe, or I was told that I have to believe. So I put myself in a state of mind where I say I believe. But here's the question that we have to ask ourselves. If you would have grown up in a Muslim home, or in a Christian home, an Episcopalian home, a Mormon home, a Baptist home, a Catholic home, or if you want a Protestant home, if you would have grown up in another community, in another environment, in another culture, among another nation, among another tribe, and they would have taught you things that are true. And when you would say, how do you know? They would say, we believe. You have to believe. Is there really a difference? Or that is what faith means. Faith means what we call blind faith. People say you take a leap of faith. What does a leap of faith mean? A leap means you have to take a quantum leap, a jump, because at some point you say, I don't know if it's true, but I just believe it. If this is the case, and this is what our Emunah is, it's pretty sad. It's pretty pathetic. But the truth is, this has nothing to do with Emunah in Judaism. This is called stupidity or intellectual laziness. It has nothing to do with Emunah. To put it bluntly, with all due respect, Emunah does not mean there's a mitzvah to be an idiot. Emunah does not mean that I think it may be a lie, but I just say I believe. That has nothing to do with truth. It has nothing to do with authenticity. It has nothing to do with Emunah. As somebody who challenged me about this series and said that this series undermines Judaism. I said, why? So what are lectures on Emunah? What's there to lecture? Emunah means you believe, you believe. What's there to lecture? So I asked him this question that I'm presenting to you. I said, if you would have grown up in Syria, not in Brooklyn, not in Miami, not in Bnei Brak, not in Jerusalem, if you would have grown up there, you would have been taught different things in your schools, different texts. You would have been taught all about Muhammad, and he is the prophet, and all of his laws, and all of the prophecies that God gave him. And when you would start asking questions, they would tell you, we believe. Don't you realize that you're basically putting Judaism exactly in the same category? Is this where your Emunah begins and where your Emunah ends? Essentially, you're telling me that you have no basis for your belief. It's just you ended up in this household. So for this, thousands of years, Jews sacrificed their lives, fought for their Judaism through thick and thin, endured savage suffering in order to cling to Judaism, and it was all based on indoctrination or dogma that they heard from their great-grandmother when they served the chicken soup, and that's the entire basis for it. The truth is that this definition of Emunah in this fashion, not thinking, being blind, being irrational, has nothing to do with Emunah. As I said, this has to do with laziness or stupidity. Depends on who you are. So now you'll ask me a question. What is Emunah? That's a great question. So I want to begin to explain this. I'm going to try to give a comprehensive overview, at least of one aspect of this discussion. Generally, if you study Jewish history and you study Jewish works throughout Jewish history, you will see generally that there are two streams of consciousness, two shittas, two mahalchim, two gangen, two perspectives, two hashkafas, that Gedolei Yisrael, great sages and leaders, developed in their works over the centuries. The best way to define it is the way we open up every one of our davenings, every one of our prayers. Baruch atah Hashem, Elokeinu ve'Elokei Avoseinu. Blessed are you, Hashem, our God, and the God of our fathers. The obvious question is, isn't the God of our fathers and our God the same God? Did God suddenly change between my father and me? What's Elokeinu v'Elokei Aviseinu? And then again we say, Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov. The God of Avraham, the God of Yitzchak, didn't they have the same God? By definition, the God they believed in was not changing from Avraham to Yitzchak, from Yitzchak to Yaakov. Or as the Pasuk says in Malachi, Ani Hashem, Lo Shanisi. So why are we distinguishing between our father's God, or our mother's God, and our God, or between Avraham's Hashem, and Yitzchak's Ribono Shel Olam, and Yaakov's Ribono Shel Olam? So there's a famous explanation of the Baal Shem Tov about this. It's brought in Svarim. I also saw it once in Shal Satshuvas Panim Me'iris, I think. Rav Eisenstadt says it over there. He was a contemporary of the Baal Shem Tov. Basically, there are two different experiences, or two different ways in which a person can come to terms with the concept of Hashem, or generally Yiddishkeit, all of Torah, and all of godliness and divinity. One is, I say it's Elokeinu, or Elokai, it's my God, it's our God, and one is Elokei Aviseinu, it's my father's God. What's the difference? In the language of the Rishonim, one is Derech HaChira, and one is Derech HaMesorah. One is through research, investigation, and one is through tradition. And throughout the generations, different Jews harbored or embraced different approaches and felt that one approach was superior or more beneficial or more true or better or more practical than the other approach. One approach said, you have to investigate. You should investigate. Search. Use your mind and ask questions. Use your mind. It's a tool that God gave you. Figure it out. Figure it out. Make him your God. The other approach said, no. Follow tradition. You have a father, you have a mother. They had fathers and mothers all the way back. You don't have to go back so long. It's 3,300 years. But in terms of generations, how many generations is it? I don't know, 30, 40, 50 people if you go back. They stood at Har Sinai. They stood at Mount Sinai. God revealed himself to the entire nation. They all accepted Torah and mitzvahs. Altogether, it's around 3 million Jews. They communicated this tradition. And therefore, for them, this was not blind. This was not ludicrous. This was not invented. They saw it. They experienced it. They gave their lives to it, and they passed it on generation to generation to generation, embraced that, and embraced the Torah as truth based on Messiah. Elokei Aviseinu. This is the God of my father, my grandfather, my great-great-grandmother, all the way back to Maimad Har Sinai, to the experience of Sinai. Which is better? Each one has an advantage, they explained. The advantage of the first, we understand. It's mine. I own it. I developed it. I acquired it. It's something that I internalized. It's much more pnimiistic. It's much more internalized. It became mine. I'm not just relying on generations of forefathers, of my ancestors. On the other hand, the other one said, no, if you're using your logic, a mind is a mind. It can take you in many different directions. You can make errors. You can stumble. You can reach wrong conclusions. Philosophy is very, very complex. Theology is very, very complex. It's winding. You can get lost. Furthermore, they said, with your mind, even if you reach accurate conclusions, but nonetheless, truth is always beyond what my mind can comprehend. And therefore, the truth that are articulated in the Torah that was authenticated at Maimad Har Sinai, this will allow me access to truth that I will never be able to achieve with my own mind. Let me give an example of two classic works. Both have and had and still have a tremendous impact on Jewish life. And they really harbored opposite views. One is the view of the Sefer HaChinuch, and one is the view of the Chovos HaLevavos. Sefer HaChinuch was written in the 13th century, in the 1200s. The man who wrote it did not write his name. He wrote that he lives in Barcelona in Spain. It's assumed that it's Reb Aaron Halevi from Barcelona, although he doesn't write his name. And it's called Sefer HaChinuch. It was the major comprehensive encyclopedia of all 630 mitzvahs of the Torah, a description of the mitzvah, the reason for it, a brief description of its laws, of its conditions, and of its message. This was a unique contribution to the book of education. Sefer HaChinuch in 1200s, one of the Rishonim. 1200s, he writes this Sefer and he presents a beautiful Hakdama. Introduction to Sefer HaChinuch is something worth reading and studying. And in this introduction, he says that for Jews, Yiddishkeit is not blind at all. If it would have been based on famous argument of the Sefer HaChinuch, of the Rambam, of the Kuzari, that if Yiddishkeit was based on miracles, if it was based on Moshe being a charismatic figure, we'll never know if it's true. And that's why all other religions are based on the fact that one person or a few people claim that they heard God speak, and then everybody chooses to believe them. He says Yiddishkeit could have ended up like that, like any other religion. Moshe Rabbeinu says God spoke to me. The only way to make it real had to be through mass revelation. And you have no other religion that could claim that millions of people experienced it, and part of the experience was a commandment to pass it on to their children and to live their whole life by it. 630 mitzvahs, and he says, therefore Jews did not doubt it. Now he says, we didn't live that. We didn't live through that experience. We have parents and great-parents and great-great-grandparents. But the Sefer HaChinuch says, I have a question, and I use his metaphor. He says, if there's a spring of water, and it's a wonderful spring, a flowing spring of water, and you're thirsty, and you want to go drink it, and there are 600,000 people who stand there and tell you, don't drink it. We consume this water, we'll tell you the consequences. Don't drink it, it will have dire consequences. It looks fresh, but it's poisonous. And there's one doctor, and the doctor says, from my understanding, and from my expertise in water, this is perfectly fine to drink. The Sefer HaChinuch says, who are you going to accept? Rationally, who are you going to accept? Are you going to accept 600,000 people who said they experimented with the water? Or are you going to expect this one man who may be brilliant and logical? He says, you know what the rational idea here is? He says, the world is complicated. He says, who understands the world? He says, we don't even understand one blade of grass. Till today, they don't even understand the depth of one blade of grass. What's in one blade of grass? He says, the wisdom in trees, in plants, in bushes, in insects, the depth of organisms. This he's writing in the 1200s. He says, we can't even figure out the secrets in herbs, in so many different herbs. And these are just herbs. So we see that the mind is so limited on understanding the secrets of the universe. He says, but what the Torah articulates gives you access to truth that the mind will never be able to fully comprehend and access, and the Torah was authenticated because of Maimed Har Sinai. Therefore, it's much superior and beneficial for Jews to follow the Messiah, to follow the tradition. Comes the Chovos HaLevavos, who lived 200 years before Sefer HaChinuch. Rabbeinu Bechaya ibn Pekuda wrote one of the most fundamental works of Jewish ethics and Jewish philosophy, Duties of the Heart. And the Rabbeinu Bechaya ibn Pekuda argues and he says, it's a mitzvah to investigate. It's a mitzvah to inquire. The Torah says you have to know. David tells Shlomo, Das Elokei avicha v'avdeya b'leiv shalom. Not believe. Know the God of your father, and then you could serve him. Know Hashem, and then you could get inspired by him. And he brings psukim, Amar Chazal. He says it's a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to put on tefillin. It's a mitzvah to keep Shabbos. It's a mitzvah to use your mind and figure out how the world proves God's existence. Figure out the truths of Yiddishkeit. He says this is a mitzvah. If you can't, you can't. But he says this is the way to do it. This is what the Chovos HaLevavos argues. The Shalah, Rabbeinu Yeshaya Horowitz in the Sefer Shnei Luchos HaBris, beautifully explains the pasuk in the Shira. We say it every morning in Parshas B'Shalach. Zeh keli v'anveyu, Elokei avi v'arei mimenu. This is my God and I will beautify him. The God of my father and I will exalt him. So the Shalah says, it's talking about two different experiences of Yiddishkeit. One is Zeh keli. This is my God. How can you call it my God? It's a God, the awareness in which I developed through my own work, through my own toil, intellectually and emotionally. Then there's Elokei avi. I'm convinced that this God exists. But why? Because my father, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, all the way back to the generation that experienced Mount Sinai. Says the Shalah, what's the difference? He says, Zeh keli, if it's my God, ve'anvehu. Anvehu, he says, is a combination of two words. Anivahu. Anivahu dvukim beyachat. Anvehu, anivahu, me and him are one. Because I own him, so to speak. He's mine. I got him. Elikei Avi, if it's the God of my father, v'arei memenu. He remains miroimim. He remains aloof, sublime, exalted, above me. It's not v'anvehu, anivahu dvukim beyachat. Two streams, two shittas, two perspectives. Comes the Rambam. The Rambam lived after Rabbeinu Bechai. Rabbeinu Bechai could have lived in the 1000s. He was born around 1050. The Rambam lived in the 1100s, a century after Rabbeinu Bechai, a century before the Sefer HaChinuch. The Rambam passed away 1205. The Rambam says, he opens up his magnum opus, Mishnah Torah Yad HaChazaka. What are the opening words of the Rambam? Anybody remembers? Yisoid ha-yisoidos, v'amud ha-chachmas. The foundation of all foundations and the pillar of all wisdom is Leida. Sheyesh shamatzu rishon v'hu mamtzi kol nimtza v'chol ha-nimtzoyim mishamayim u'va'aretz u'masha b'neiim loy nimtzu ela ma'amitas imotzoy v'im yala ala das shu'enoi motzoy ein davar acher yachal le'motzoys. The first two halachas of Rambam. To know that there is a primary first existence who brings all of existence into being. And everything in existence, from heaven to earth and in between, only emerged from the truth of his existence. The Rambam doesn't say any other word but Leida. And he finishes off halacha vav, v'yediyas davar zeh mitzvah aseh shenemar anochi Hashem Elokecha. Knowing this is a mitzvah, because the pasuk says anochi Hashem Elokecha, which according to him means yediyah, and actually the source of this is a Zoyar, Raya Mehemne and Parshas Nasi, that it's a mitzvah. The Rambam has another sefer, also an encyclopedia of the mitzvahs, called Sefer HaMitzvahs. That was written in Arabic. And most translations, the first mitzvah is lahamin sheyeshem alakah. The mitzvah say lahamin, to believe sheyeshem alakah, to believe there is a God. But in his Mishnah Torah Yad HaChazaka, he says Leida. And I believe in a recent translation by Rav Kapach of Yemen, who was a big expert in Arabic, and retranslated the Rambam's works from the old translations by the Ibn Tebun family. I believe he also says in Sefer HaMitzvahs, it's about knowledge, not faith. In other words, the Rambam believes you have to know. Knowledge can only happen if you investigate. I'm giving you an example of a few people, but if you'll go through the generations, you'll see there were thinkers on each side. You'll have Rabbeinu Saadia Gaon from the 900s. You'll have the Chovos HaLevavos. You'll have the Rambam. You'll have the Even Ezra. You'll have Ralbag. You have Reb Yosef Olbo, the author of Ikrim. You have the Abarbanel, Don Yitzchak Abarbanel. You'll have Reb Chizdoi Kraskus. They emphasize the mitzvah to know. Chakira. And then you'll have the Sefer HaChinuch. You'll have Reb Yehuda Halevi in the Kuzari. Reb Yehuda Halevi from Spain. Also the 1100s. And he'll say, what you receive through the Messiah is far superior, far more beneficial. And this will continue. We'll have a famous Shal Shuvas of Harivash, Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Shesha Siman Memhei, who attacks the path of, relatively, who attacks that other path and feels again the tradition is great. It is always much better. Messiah is much better. Elikei Avi say no. I'm not going to get into it at the moment, but there is a Chidushei Harim who says something, and a generation later, Reb Chaim Shmulevich, the Mir Rosh Yeshiva, said a similar Torah, that this was a debate. Who were the first ones to have this debate? They claimed this was a debate between Yisroi and Moshe Rabbeinu. The Mechilta says in Parsha Shmos that Yisroi made an oath with his son-in-law. What was the oath? Ben Hanoilad Rishon Ben Hanoilad Tchila LaAvodah Zarah. The child who's born first, you give up for Avodah Zarah. And Moshe agrees. And that's why Moshe had a problem with this boy. His name was Gershom, not Eliezer. Gershom. This boy had to give up for idolatry. And everybody asks, Moshe agreed for a shidduch? Imagine somebody makes a shidduch with your son and says, one condition, you have to eat pork every night for dinner. You say no, for a shidduch? You give up on Avodah Zarah? Who, Moshe? And who? Yisro, who gave up that Avodah Zarah? Go find another shidduch. Go find another one. It's very difficult to understand. So the Chidushei Harim brilliantly says, we don't know where to put the comma. Everybody reads the Mechilta wrong. We read the Mechilta, Ben Hanoilet Chila al Avodah Zarah. The boy who's born first goes to Avodah Zarah. He says, wrong reading. Ben Hanoilet. The boy who was born, comma, Chila al Avodah Zarah. First, I'm going to teach him what's out there on the other side. So then he'll be able to appreciate Yiddishkeit. He shouldn't be able to say his whole life, the grass is greener on the other side. You want to see the other side? I'll show you the other side. He says, like me. Nobody appreciates Judaism like me. You know why? Nobody could say I was brainwashed. Nobody could say I was given the Kool-Aid. Nobody could say I grew up in a frum household. I didn't grow up in anything. Ata yadati ki gadol Hashem mikol elikim. What does Rashi say? Only Yisro could say God is greater than every other God, because Malamet shlo yiniach avodah zarah shelo yavda. Yisro spent years in India, in Tibet, in New Zealand, in South America, in the East, in the West. He searched everything. He knew everything. He says, Ata yadati. Moshe said, I don't want this, I don't need this. Again, a very fascinating argument, but Moshe consents with the first boy. It's not exactly the same argument, it's much more subtle, it's on a different angle. I'm just, on a general level, it can be connected. So we have our two streams. But, let's go one step further. This entire argument has very little relevance to the questions that I received in my email. And to questions that I and many others receive every day, and questions that we all deal with, personally or collectively, that we speak about or we don't speak about, and questions generally that come up today. And I'll tell you why. These two streams, these two shittas, these two views in Yiddishkeit are all predicated on one premise. And that is, you don't have a question. You don't have a question. A Jewish boy, a Jewish girl goes up in a Jewish home. They believe their parents. They believe there's authenticity here. They believe there's truth. One view says, your parents are great people, but you gotta go figure it out on your own. Another view says, no, follow the Messiah. That's a legitimate and deep argument in Jewish history. But what if somebody has questions? What if somebody comes and says, I don't know, this doesn't make sense to me. I have too many difficulties with this. I can't accept it. There's no view in Judaism that I know of, authentic view in Jewish tradition, that says that you have to look at this boy or girl and say, you're a shegitz. You're not allowed to ask questions. You're not allowed to ask questions. And the reason is very simple. If somebody comes to me and asks me a question, and my only response to him is what? We don't ask. By us, we don't ask questions. We believe. We have a tradition. We don't ask questions. I have a question. Did we eliminate his question? You're 19 years old. You're 16 years old. You're 9 years old. You're 29 years old. You're 42 years old. And you come to your father, your mother, your Rebbe, your Rosh Hashiva, your Mashgiach, your Rebbe, your Mechanech, your Mashpia, your teacher, your mentor, and you say, I have this and this question. And all he can tell you is, by Yidden, Fleckmanish, keine Shailas. Jews don't ask. It's disgusting to ask such a question. It's horrible to ask such a question. How dare you ask such a question? How did I end up with such a child? How did I end up with such a student? I have to go check my tefillin and my mezuzahs. And find out, maybe I'm not Jewish. How did I end up with such a person? How dare you? We don't ask such questions. Great, beautiful. Messiah, it sounds great. I want to know one thing. Did you get rid of the question? Does this boy say, Tati, now I get it. It's wonderful, I have no questions anymore, and now the faith starts burning in his soul. Did you ever see one experience like that? Did you ever see that happen even once? The boy who comes to me and says, as it happened, if I would have grown up in a different community, in a secular home, or in another religion, and they would have told me all the stories that they have, and they would told me God wants that you have to do this on Friday, and God wants this, and if not, they also have a Gehenim. I'm also going to burn. And when I say, can you prove that anybody ever come back? And they'll say, for that you're going to burn even more. And I say, did anybody tell you about that fire? Oh, you don't know what type of Gehenim you're going to have. And the boy comes to me and he says, now I'm an adult and the fear doesn't speak to me anymore. And telling me that I'm going to end up in pots with hot water. And I'm going to have to put my child into a pot of hot water, as they teach in some places. Rahman al-Islam. Doesn't speak to me anymore. It's all brainwashing. And all I could tell this child is, we don't ask questions by us. This is what enlightened people do. This is what maskilim do. This is what Gentiles do. This is what Goyim do. This is not what Jews do. Does he go away feeling, now I'm satisfied, now I can embrace Judaism with enthusiasm? Or maybe, my dear friends, it's actually the other way around. And I'm going to quote what a boy once told me, a yeshiva bacher once told me. He says, when I came to my father the first time with my questions, 50% I thought he doesn't have an answer. 50% I thought he has an answer. I wasn't sure. When he told me, we don't ask such questions, never ask such questions, now I became convinced 100% that he doesn't have an answer. Not only did I not eliminate the question, I confirmed it. I enforced it. You're trying to strengthen his Emunah. All you did was show him that this faith is futile. It's irrational. Let's understand especially how relevant it's in this generation. We live in a generation and people can argue theories from today till tomorrow. But if you speak to people, we live in a generation that if a young man or a young woman comes with real questions, and all I can tell them is, we don't speak like this, we don't ask, get out of my office, get out of my room, or stop it, or just get it out of your mind. All I could say is, we don't ask questions, Mesoira, Ruach Yisrael Sove, Emunah is given git for the Tate, for the Zayde, for the Elter Zayde. They were smarter than you. Everybody was smarter than you. Who do you think you are? A little boy, come you, you're a little chick who didn't open your eyes yet. You say, Father, I may be a chick, but I have a question. Sometimes chicks have questions. Sometimes you ask questions with closed eyes. In our generation, you tell me, what does that demonstrate to him? That Judaism is a real religion or not a real religion? Does it tell him that Yiddishkeit has a strong basis, or it says that the whole Yiddishkeit hinkt auf ein Fissel, it's a limping Judaism? Remember, we cannot choose today to answer or not to answer. You know why? If you don't answer, you're also giving an answer. I never saw somebody not answer and not give an answer. By not answering, you're giving a very powerful answer. And the answer that you're giving from the perspective of the questionnaire is, Ganz Yiddishkeit steht auf hinnerische Fisselach. You know what that means? You want to translate? All of Judaism stands on chicken legs. In other words, I don't have what to say. I don't have what to say. And I don't have a problem with people not knowing answers. Wise people are ignorant. Wise people are, everyone is ignorant, but wise people acknowledge ignorance. I don't have a problem with not having an answer. I have a problem with delegitimizing a person's question because I don't have an answer. Mocking the person, disrespecting the person, insulting the person, chastising the person for no reason. I could say, interesting question, let me call somebody. Let me research it. Why don't you speak to Pliny Ben Pliny? No problem. But why are you screaming at him? You think you're not answering him? Of course you're answering him. You're answering him that you have no answer. Besides confirming his doubts, you also make him believe that he's a nobody, that he's a horrible person. That's a second evil. We take intelligent kids who are searching for the truth, and what's the price for searching for the truth? You get knocked down and you're made to feel that you are a horrible, horrible person. So it's a fascinating thing. If I'm a child who doesn't search for the truth, then my self-esteem gets built up. The child who's inquisitive, the young person who's really searching for emes and struggling with it, these are the people who get put down when they should be the ones who are celebrated, who are embraced. They're wonderful, deep souls. Now, if somebody doesn't have a question, fine. If somebody doesn't have a question, great. There's no mitzvah to go and invent every question that was ever asked and plant them in people's minds. But if somebody is struggling with a question, emotionally, intellectually, experientially, psychologically, spiritually, scholastically, how can I not address it? How can I reject it? A boy came to me. He was a yeshiva here in Muncie. A young boy, 14, 15 years old. Very, very wise kid. Very, very intelligent. I said, why do you come to me? He says, I'll tell you. He was in a particular school, and he had a certain question. A very interesting question about Jews being the chosen people, one of those questions. And he asked his teacher in class. And the teacher said, Jews don't ask such questions. So he went to another 5 staff members in the school. There's somebody sitting in this room who can authenticate every detail of this story. He went to 5 staff of that school. Each one of them either said, we don't ask these questions. 2 of them denigrated him for asking the question. Nobody can address it. So he says, at that point, I came home, I told my father, this place is not teaching an iota of truth. Why should I sit here? I'm done. So his father said, I want you to speak to one more person. He says, a 7th rabbi who's going to mock me? He says, that's why I'm in your office. That's why I'm in your office. So of course, I said, the first thing is, let me give you a hug. And that was probably 40% of the answer. And then I said, it's a wonderful question. And just the dignity to say it's a wonderful question. It was so meaningful. Not that it provided an answer. It was the basic dignity. A kid is searching for an answer. Why am I mocking him? Now I want to tell you about an interesting, where you'll see this point brought out, a very interesting debate between 2 great, actually, Hasidic masters. There was a Jew, some of you know his works. He was known in his time as Sar Beis HaZoyar, one of the greatest Mekabolim of the day, the Zidichover, Reb Tzvi Hirsch Eichenstein of Zidichov. He lived in Zidichov, which is in Poland, in Galicia. And he was born in 1763. That's 3 years after the Baal Shem Tov passed away, and he passed away 1831. Sar Beis HaZoyar, Reb Tzvi Hirsch of Zidichov. He has a sefer called Sur Meira V'asei Tov. In it, he attacks very heavily. When the word attacks, he takes on very, very heavily the Rambam and the Chovos HaLevavos. When the Chovos HaLevavos writes in his introduction in Shara Yichud that it's a mitzvah to investigate if there's a God and what type of reality is this God, the Zidichover says, this is of course centuries later, he says, Chalila lecha hachosid. How dear the Chassid, the Chovos HaLevavos write this. He said, he is committing the same sin like the Jews when they came out of Egypt in Parshas Beshalach and they asked one question. Hayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu im oyin. Is God among us or not? He said, what do you mean if he's among you or not? He took you out of Mitzrayim, he split the sea, he gave you Torah, he nurtures you, he embraces you. It's before the giving the Torah. He did everything for you. And suddenly you look at him and say, Hayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu im oyin. The Chovos HaLevavos says, a Jew has to start asking, is there a God? What is this God? How can you prove it? And he goes on pages, very deeply hurt by this approach. On the book Sur Meira V'asei Tov, there are famous footnotes of the Bnei Yissaschar. They're known as Hisafis Meharav Tzvi Elimelech. The Bnei Yissaschar was another great Hasidic master, a contemporary of Reb Tzvi Hirsch of Zidichov. Reb Tzvi Elimelech Shapiro of Dinov, which is also in Poland and Galicia. He was born in 1783, passed away 1841. Tafresh Aleph, Yud Ches Tevis, right? Is the eine Klach von der Bnei Yissaschar da? Yud Ches Tevis, right? Okay. The Bnei Yissaschar writes footnotes on the Surmei Rav Seiter of the Didichover, and listen to his comment. Now you have to know the Bnei Yissaschar. Anybody who knows the Bnei Yissaschar works knows how much he criticizes the philosophers. Especially in his generation, where the Haskalah, the Enlightenment, it became so entrenched in Jewish life. The Bnei Yissaschar speaks about Emunah and Mesorah, beyond Seichel, beyond your own investigation. This is the Bnei Yissaschar. But when the Zidichover is so upset at the Rambam and the Chovos HaLevavos for their approach, the Bnei Yissaschar, Reb Tzvi Elimelech Shapiro of Dinov, says, and I quote a line, he says, Harav medaber mikirois liboy migoidel emunasei utshekosei l'Hashem. The Heilige Zidichover is speaking from the depth of his heart because of the deep faith and craving he had for God. But he said, I don't understand him. The Jews who left Mitzrayim, they saw Hashem. They saw it happen. When they say, Ayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu imayin, ooh, it's a sin. He says, but today, we don't see. We don't have that experience. He says somebody who wants to love God, he wants a relationship with God, but he can't. And therefore he says, I have to go ask questions. He says, how can you call this a sin? And then the Bnei Yissaschar adds, what did Avraham Avinu do? Would the Zidichover tell this to Avraham Avinu also? Imagine Avraham Avinu comes to Terach. Imagine, yeah? He says, Terach, what do we believe in? He says, we believe, you see this nice getchke here? You want a good shidduch, you daven to him. And Avraham Avinu says, could you prove it? It seems to me like a piece of granite, an expensive piece of granite. Terach says, prove it? Emunah. Emunah! Avraham says, what Emunah? Prove it! He says, I have a tradition. My father was in this business. My Zayda, this is how we pay tuition. This is how we pay for the mortgage. This is how we send you to college. This is how we pay off the mortgage. What do you mean? This is how we do it. Avram says, I'm looking for truth. I'm not looking to pay the mortgage. I'm looking for truth. Terach says, Apikur says, Arois. I like Nocher and Haran. Nocher and Haran are good kids. And Avram Avinu would have accepted this. Oy vavoy. Thank God Avram Avinu said, I don't believe stupidity. I don't believe stupidity. And he takes a hammer and he crushes stupidity, both conceptually and physically. So he says, of course he has to investigate. Avraham Avinu investigated. He didn't have a Matan Torah Yetzias Mitzrayim. He didn't have that. What is he supposed to do? If Terach would have told him Apikoros and Avraham Avinu would say, okay, I'm not going to ask any more questions, there would be no Jew in the world, there would be no Judaism in the world. True, the Bnei Yissaschar says. Philosophy confused many, many people. The Bnei Yissaschar knows that. But he says, how can you attack a person who's investigating because he asks questions? Again, if there's no questions, great. Now understand, even if there's no questions, there's still the shit of the Chovos HaLevavos. Ask. Even so, not because the Chovos HaLevavos had doubts. He said, just like Hashem wants you to shake a lulav, to put on tefillin, to eat matzah on Pesach, He wants you to know Him. Others had different approaches. That's even if there's no question. But if there's a question, the Bnei Yissaschar says, what does this do? What do you want from the person? What are you going to tell him? Don't ask, what did you do? You convinced him that way. You gave him Emunah that way. I want to illustrate the debate between these two people, the Zidichover and the Bnei Yissaschar, both from the very, very heavy world of Nister, the very inspired world of Nister, of Kabbalah, of Chassidus. I want to illustrate it, okay? You come to your son, your 21-year-old son, and you say, Yankee, it's time to go into the chuppah. It's time to go to the chuppah. You light the candles, you take him under his arm, and you start going to the chuppah. And on the way, Yankee turns to you, to his father, and he says, 1 second, can we prove that you're my father? Could you please bring me your ksuvah? I want to see your ksuvah. So you bring your ksuvah. He says, no, I'm not sure you're my father. Let's do a DNA test. So you're under the chuppah, you say, I'm not sure he's my father. Let's stop this chuppah. Let's go test DNA. Let's see if there's a match. You look at your son and you say, are you crazy? For 21 years, I held you, I supported you. I fed you, I nurtured you. I protected you, I loved you. Everything you have, I gave you. I paid now for this Streimel, for this Bekshire. I'm supporting you for the next 8.5 years in Koilel. I bought you a house. I paid for this whole wedding $95,000. I'm going to be in debt for 8 years. Why did I do it? Because I'm not your father? With this audacity that you need DNA to prove that I'm your father. Yeah. That's what the Zidichover is feeling. That's what the Bnei Yissaschar says. He sees God. He's having dveikus with God. And you're telling me, so according to the Big Bang, God, a little DNA, bring me your ksuva. The Zidichover is alarmed. He feels it, he experiences it. But the Bnei Yissaschar responds, wait 1 second. You see how sophisticated people argue. He says, of course he speaks like this. But now I have a question. What if a child is adopted? What if a boy is adopted and a man walks in and says, I'm your father? What does he say? Yeah, you're my father. Come, take me to the chuppah. Let's go do a DNA test. So the Bnei Yissaschar says, what do you want? People are experiencing God. People are seeing God. This generation saw God. This generation saw Auschwitz. People have questions. What are you going to mock them? You're going to denigrate them? Address them. Yeah. Some of them need explanation. They need to understand. They need perspective. If they don't have questions, great. But if yes, this is what the Bnei Yissaschar is responding. Thus, it's clear that the idea that Judaism is based on not thinking. On thinking it may be a lie, but you know what? I just say it's true. This is absolutely ridiculous. It's ludicrous. Somebody told me today that he was at a tish by the Kloisenberger Rebbe. And the Kloisenberger Rebbe says at the tish a story, I guess an anecdote. There was an old Jew who was on his deathbed. And he turns to his family and he says, before I go, I have to do something. And he goes, the Kloisenberger Rebbe says this at his tish. He goes, and in the basement, he finds a tzelem. A cross. On a Hepzichan Selaman, he starts crossing himself. You? What are you doing? He says, listen, I'm about to die, and you never know. What if I come there and I find out that they were right? He says, Unayb nicht, is mit ein Christ weniger. Okay. Mit ein Gott. The Kloisenberger Rebbe was bringing something out. He says, that's what some people think Emunah is. Okay. I happen to grow up here, and if I grow up there, it would have been different. Now let's understand. There's something even fundamentally, very deeply flawed about this. And that is, this is such an embarrassment and denigration to Judaism. Somebody who fundamentally believes that the only way we can deal with questions is by laughing from them or mocking them, it's a disgrace to Yiddishkeit. Here is the rule. Fear of questions often comes from a lack of confidence. When you don't have answers, you're afraid of questions. When you have answers, you're not afraid of questions. Judaism was never, ever afraid of questions. The reason it wasn't afraid of questions is because its basis is based on truth. And truth is never afraid of questions. Even the view that says you don't need a research. If you don't have questions, you could just trust the Messiah. It's not that they're ever afraid of questions. It's they say you don't need it and you'll reach into a deeper place. Never coming out of fear. Avram Avinu wasn't afraid of questions. Avram Avinu broke all the slumim of his day. That is the definition of a Jew. He doesn't believe in idols. He doesn't believe in things because that's the status quo, because it's easy. He looks for truth and only truth. Avram Avinu wasn't afraid of questions. The definition of a Jew is he breaks all the idols. He wants to know what is truth. That's what he's looking for. He's not looking for what is comfortable and what his father says is comfortable, what his mother says is comfortable. He's looking for emes, and he's not afraid to find that truth, to discover that truth, and to explore that truth. Nobody was afraid of questions throughout all of Jewish history. Not Avram, and not Moshe, not Yeshaya, not Yirmiyah, not Eov, not the Tanoim, not the Amoraim, not the Psad Yagon, not the Rambam, not the Chovos HaLevavos, not the Sefer HaChinuch, not the Yehuda HaLevi, not the Arizal, not the Beis Yosef, not the Balatanya, not the Vilna Gaon, not the Chaim Volozhin, not the Chofetz Chaim, not the Lubavitcher Rebbe. None of them were afraid of questions. Why were they not afraid of questions? They were not afraid of questions because truth is never fearful of questions, even if it doesn't always believe that everyone has to engage it. And everybody needs to ask these questions. Somebody asked me once a question in the middle of a shiur, said, "Are you in a cult?" They asked me if I'm in a cult. So I said, it reminded me once in yeshiva, somebody came over to me and said, as an outsider, what is your opinion of the human race? So I told him, judging on you, terrible. I said, you're asking me if I'm in a cult that presupposes that you're not in a cult. So you have the liberty to ask me. He says, forget about me. I want to know if you think you're in a cult. I say, here's the deal. If I'm really in a cult, you don't think I would know that I'm in a cult. People who are in cults usually don't acknowledge they're in cults. He says, right, but you're intelligent at least to understand that. So could you prove to me that you're not in a cult? So I said, let's not talk about me, let's talk about you for a moment. It'll be easier so I could be a little more objective. He says, let's talk about me. How do I know I'm not in a cult? I said, I don't think so. Maybe you are in a cult. I can't say you're not in a cult. He says, if I wasn't, how do I know? I said, rule number one is to ask this question continuously. People who are in cults don't like these questions. If you can ask this question and say, how do I know I'm not in a cult? Consistently, you're probably not in a cult. But you have to be able to really confront the question and find out if you are or not. But then I said, I'll tell you the real answer. I know people who are in cults. I've dealt with them quite not so infrequently. The first rule they tell you when you join a cult is, don't speak to people outside. Why? Because they're afraid that they're going to plant in you a question you won't be able to answer. So they want to isolate you from anybody who doesn't agree with your view. And if you ask questions, they will not allow you to ask questions because what they want is they want to crush your intelligence and your creativity, so you shouldn't ask questions. So I said, wherever you grow up in a system, that the main message is never speak to people who don't look like you, never have conversations with people who disagree with you, never listen to an argument or a question, and they never allow you to ask questions, it's dangerous. You should ask yourself if you're in a cult. If Judaism would have ever done this, I, for one, could not be here. This is the worst sign. This is the sign of the death of truth. And the first Jew knew the prerequisite for any discovery of truth is, I don't have idols. I smash idols. I look for truth. Just because something is an idol and people worship it has nothing to do with emes. You know, I once saw a word from Reb Shimon Shkop. Reb Shimon Shkop was a student of Reb Chaim Brisker. He was the Rosh Hashiva of Grodno in Lithuania. Passed away in 1940, right before the war. He was authored Shara Yosher, or Chedusha Reb Shimon Yehuda HaKoyen. He writes something fascinating. He said something fascinating. The Gemara says in Brachos that at the beginning of Shemona Esrei we identify Hashem as Elokei Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. The God of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. How do we end the first blessing? Baruch atah Hashem, Mogen Avraham, the shield of Avram. Why not the shield of Yitzchak and Yaakov? Why did Yitzchak and Yaakov get deleted from the end of the blessing? So the Gemara says in Brachos, we learn that out from the Psukim and Parshas Lech Lecha, that you begin davening with all the three avos. Yachal yih choisman bekulon tamad loima v'nivruchu v'chakal mish b'chais adama b'chachoisman. At the end, we conclude only with you, with Avram. So Reb Shimon Shkop explained homiletically that Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov had very different experiences of Judaism. Yitzchak had a father He was Avram Avinu. He could look up to him. Yaakov had a father and a grandfather. What about Avraham? If he would look up to his father, he would not be Avram Avinu. His father was a Terach, and his mother was an Amasloi, who the Gemara says conceived him while she was a Nida. Me'yitein tar mitame v'lo yachad. So Avram Avinu had to own his Judaism. He had to discover God on his own. He couldn't say, I learned from my father, I learned from my Zayda. Throughout Jewish history, there were different types of Jews. There's the Jew of Avram, there's the Jew of Yitzhak, there's the Jew of Yaakov, there's the Jew who discovers it on his own, there's the Jew who discovers it based on his father, there's the Jew who's inspired by a father and a Zayda. 2 generations. Yachal yu chaysmin b'kulan. He says, at the end of Jewish history, at the end of Galus, you finish with Avram, Magen Avram. He says, there's going to come a generation where Jews are going to go back to Avram. They're going to have to discover their own God. They will not be able to rely on and live off the God of their father, the God of their grandfather, the God of their great-great-great-grandfather, as powerful as that is. Yu chaysmin b'cha chaysmin. A generation that needs to find their own relationship. We are experiencing that generation. We are experiencing thousands and thousands of young men and women, or middle-aged men and women, or older men and women, who are asking a lot of questions. You know why? Because they want to have a real relationship with Hashem. Because they want Yiddishkeit to be really meaningful. Instead of we seizing the opportunity and saying, wow, we have Avram Avinus, what do? We mock them, we denigrate them, we insult them. Some of us throw them out of our houses, we alienate them, we put them on meds, stupidity. They don't fit into my box, so they need meds. Because they don't fit in exactly to my stigmas in my box. I'm not talking if they really need meds. I'm talking about meds because they have certain questions, so they're not normal. Maybe they're normal. Efshar zayin zaydin amala. Maybe they're a little more honest. They don't want to lie. They don't want to repress. This is a generation. They want to find Hashem. They want to have an experiential relationship. A real relationship. And sometimes that comes with a lot of searching, a lot of scrutiny, a lot of questions. Now you're going to ask me, so how do you answer these questions? How do you answer these questions? Now that's a good question. That's a good question. Sometimes my answer has to be honest. You know what? I don't know. Great question. I don't know. Let me think about it. Let's search together. Let's go to somebody. Let's read. Let's find out. That's great. Sometimes I have to determine if the questions are maybe coming from deep emotional pain. Let's understand. If people have been abused by very religious rabbis or teachers, they will blame religion for their trauma. And they will already find a lot of questions. If you don't address the pain, you're not addressing their questions. Sometimes people are skeptical and cynical just because they're afraid or just because they're looking for justifications. I have to search what's happening. And sometimes there are authentic questions that I really have to address. So yes, there are different approaches and different responses, but the common denominator is when people have questions, I can't ignore them and make believe they're just going to go away. At last, you're going to ask this very legitimate question. So what is Emunah? What is faith? You just said there's no such a thing. Why do we call it Emunah Pshuta? Emunah Pshuta! Or Emunah Pshita, simple faith. And why did I learn in all the holy works that Emunah is higher than Seichel? It's higher than rationality. And why did it say that the Baal Shem Tov said, Ich will sein ein Narr, I want to be a fool. And the Medrash says, Pesi yamin l'chol davar zeh Moshe Rabbeinu. A fool who believes everything is Moshe Rabbeinu, Shema Yisrael. What is happening? According to what you said, what's the standard of Emunah? Emunah Pshuta, higher than Seichel. What makes it higher than rationality? What is this Emunah Pshuta? Simple faith. So I'm going to say this very briefly, even though this needs elaboration and explanation. Emunah Pshuta doesn't mean simple faith. It's a very distorted translation. In fact, our definition of what we call Emunah is an error. It's an error. And the source of this is in Tanya in chapter 18 and 19. If you want more, you have the Rapshitze Zera Kodesh in Parshas Vayikra, has a whole shtickle on this, and many other works, especially in Nister. The definition of Emunah is something else. Emunah has nothing to do with being an idiot. Emunah has nothing to do with being blind. Emunah has nothing to do with being dumb. Emunah has nothing to do with closing your eyes and saying, brainwash me, please, please, just brainwash me. Nothing to do with Emunah. That's not Emunah Pshuta, that's not higher than Seichel. So what is Emunah? Emunah is never afraid of questions. Emunah is never afraid of intellect. Emunah never competes with rationality. Emunah is this: a Jewish soul is a chelik eloka mimal mamash. A Jewish soul is a piece of Hashem, a fragment of God. Thus, the soul has eyes that see the Ribono Shel Olam. They experience intimately Hashem's reality. This is what Emunah Pshuta means. Pshuta doesn't mean simple. Pshuta comes from the word mufshat, divested. It's an Emunah that does not need equations, mathematics, explanations, rationality to prove that there is an existence of God. There's a dimension of the human psyche called the neshama that experiences Hashem like we experience reality with our five senses. In other words, Emunah is a sense. It's the sixth sense of the soul. It's the perception. It's the ability of the soul, the capacity of the soul, that when cultivated, allows the soul and us to experience ultimate reality. It can be plugged just like I can plug my ears on the airplane not to hear noise. I could blindfold my eyes not to see. But Emunah is an essential dimension of the soul that experiences Hashem in an immediate fashion. That's what the Zidit Shaiva was talking about. You grew up with a father for 21 years. You see him every day. He was there for you through thick and thin. And suddenly on the way to the chuppah you said, prove to me that you're my father. Bring the ksuva. Really? We experience life together. Not that DNA will miss this. Not that we're afraid of DNA. I'm not afraid if... I had once a son who tends to me, Tati, prove to me that I'm not adopted. I said, if you really want, I could prove it. I'm not afraid of it. But of course it was a joke. I mean, he was in a mood, whatever. He didn't get ice cream, so he decided he was adopted. Fine. Emunah doesn't compete with rationality. It's not afraid of it. Doesn't run from it. It's beyond it. It's another dimension of experiencing. I see it. It experiences Hashem. It's an immediate reality. It's a whole different concept. It's beyond Seichel. It doesn't compete with it. That's what Emunah means. That's what Emunah Pshut is. Nothing. If I would have grown up somewhere else, I would have said the same thing. That has nothing to do with Emunah. That has to do with intellectual laziness, as I said. You know the story, yeah? They say there was once a Pavarotti, the great opera singer, did a rendition of Psalm chapter 23. Mizmor David Hashem Ro'eh Le'echser, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Pavarotti did a beautiful rendition, and then an Alta Yid, an old Jew, gets up and says, can I do my rendition? He says, sure. And he starts doing his rendition of Tehillim Chav Gimel. He doesn't know how to read, he doesn't know how to pronounce, doesn't know how to carry a tune. But he was a real Jew. So he said it with his whole soul, and people started to cry. So they say at the end, Pavarotti turned to him and said, I don't understand. I did a magnificent job. Impeccable, flawless. Nobody cried. They applauded me, but nobody cried. You get up, you did a horrible job on every level. You geklept avart to avart, a note to a note. There was nothing right about what you did, but everybody was crying. What's the difference? I also did the Lord as my shepherd. You did. What's the difference? He says, Pavarotti, I'll explain to you the difference. You know the psalm, but I know the shepherd. That makes the difference. That means, the Tanya says in chapter 29, if a Jew comes to you and he says, I have sveikus in Emunah, that's a sentence that is irrational. You never have sveikus in Emunah. You have sveikus in Seichel. You never have. No Jew in history ever did or ever will have sveikus in Emunah. You can't have a doubt in Emunah. There's no sveikus in Emunah. Emunah is the experience of a neshama. It's the oneness of a soul with God, which is unconditional. Every single Jew, no matter who he or she is, no matter where they grow up, no matter how much they know and how much they observe. This is the essential dynamic of the soul. It's the color of the soul. I can't change the color of my eyes. I can't change the color of my soul. Sveikus and Emunah I don't have. I have confusions in my intellectual capacity to make peace between my rational identity and my Emunah. That's fine. And therefore, once one experiences Emunah, the role of Seichel is never to be underestimated. It serves a beautiful role, and that is to allow the Emunah to permeate even my intellect, to remove the blockages, the partition that the intellect imposes on Emunah. That is the role of it. But there's never a competition between them. There's never a fight between them. I want to conclude with a story that happened not long ago, that I think illustrates this at least to some degree. Anti-Semitism has grown dramatically in Europe in recent years, including in Hungary, in Ungarn, where some of you can trace back your ancestry to, your blessed ancestry to, your Messiah. Your Messiah. Part of the anti-Semitism outbreak in Hungary is due to a very successful fascist, anti-Semitic political party called Jabok. That's the name of the party. It's pronounced it's written Jabok, it's pronounced Yabok. And the leader of that party is a young Hungarian man. His name is Csanád Szegedy. Csanád Szegedy, tall, powerful, brilliant communicator, handsome, wise, clever, great oratory skills and a lot of charisma. And he became one of the leaders of this party, a very young man, and he really made it extremely popular and successful. He also founded a paramilitary group fashioned based on the Nazi type of marches during the Second World War. And he and his party preach open anti-Semitism. They blame the Jews on most of the problems in the world, and of course all the problems in Hungary is the fault of the Jews and the Gypsies, if that makes you feel better. It's the Jews and the Gypsies. His party and his mouth spewed Jew hatred, anti-Semitism, horrible things about Israel and the Jewish people, and dark allusions and horrible humor about Jewish power and the Jewish obsession to take over the world. This was Csanád Szegedy. He was the star of the party and a rising star in Hungary. And he was one of the members of the Hungarian parliament. And this continued until one day he made a discovery and it changed his life forever. It was a cozy afternoon in April 2012. He went to visit his 92-year-old grandmother who lived in a suburb in Hungary. And he was schmoozing with his grandmother, and out of the blue, she rolled up her sleeve and she pointed to a number tattooed on her arm. And she looked at him and she said, "Let me tell you my story. In 1945, I was a young Hungarian woman. I was liberated from the hell of Auschwitz. My mother died when I was a baby. My aunt and uncle adopted me. They were taken to Auschwitz. They were murdered. Our entire family was murdered, together with almost 1 million Hungarian Jews who were murdered in 1944. I survived the gas chambers, and I emerged from Auschwitz after the liberation in 1945, starved, emaciated. I looked like a skeleton. I was beaten. I was crushed. I had nobody in the world. My trauma convinced me that to be Jewish was a serious liability. If the Holocaust would happen again, the Jews would be targeted. I married a Jewish survivor in a perfectly Orthodox wedding, a Jewish religious halachic wedding. He was also in Auschwitz. Shortly after the wedding, we decided together, why do we have to impose this liability on our children? We will hide our Jewishness forever. We will never tell our children that they belong to the Jewish people. We changed our last names to a perfect Hungarian, non-Jewish sounding name. And we committed that we would never reveal the secret to anybody that we are Jewish. Nobody knew us. We were alone in the world. All of our relatives were murdered by the Germans. This wasn't difficult. We started a new life. We had a daughter. Her name is Katalin. And our greatest nachas was when she came home with a perfectly handsome, good-looking Hungarian shegitz. And she married him, and we looked at each other and we said, success. She married a regular Hungarian non-Jew, and in 1982, when you, Chanad, were born to a Hungarian father and our daughter Katalin, this for us meant that we could look away from our horrific dark past as a new chapter in our life ultimately took root. We were regular Hungarian non-Jews. She looked at her grandson and she said, so I want you to know that I'm Jewish. Your mother is Jewish, and therefore you're also Jewish. Now understand, this wasn't just a challenge to his career, to his accomplishments, to his vocation, to his future. This was a shock to his very sense of self. He was the anti-Semite. He was the Jew hater. He was the one who explained to the world how horrible the Jews are, and he is the Jew. He is the Jew. And he looked at his grandmother and he says, why did we never see this number? She said, in the winter I always made sure that to wear sleeves, and in the summer I would put plaster on it. She didn't want to stand out. I would put plaster on the numbers so nobody would be able to identify it. And now suddenly, his anti-Semitism, his racism, his fascism, which is who he was or who he thought he was now all delegitimized by this moment. He made a call to his best friend, and he told him what he just heard. And what did his best friend tell him? What would you tell your friend? His best friend said, the best thing that can happen to you right now is I take a gun and I shoot your brains out. It's literally the biggest favor I can do for you at this moment in your life. 32-year-old man, because what are you supposed to do now? You know what he did? Shana Jagedi did two things. Two things. Number one, he went immediately to the party leaders and he broke the news to them that he's Jewish, and he gave in his resignation. They didn't want to accept his resignation. They said, it's good to have you because it's called the Pope Jews. We'll have token Jews so we could say we're not anti-Semitic. We even have a Jew. It's a great cover-up. He said, no way. I'm done with you. I'm Jewish. You know what else he did? He called up the Chabad Shliach in Budapest, Rabbi Shlomo Kovesh, who himself is a Baal Tshuva from Budapest. And he gets on the phone. Rabbi Kovesh answers the phone. He says, hi, this is Shana Jagedi. He's like, what? He says, I'm a Jew and I want to become Jewish. So imagine I would get a call from, I don't know, Malcolm X. I'll get a call from Lou Sharpton. I don't know. Say, Rabbi Jacobson, I'm Jewish. Can I come to your shir and look at the Torah and Masechta Rosh Hashanah? So we're sure going to go to a psychiatrist. So Shlomo Kovesh, it's like a neo-Nazi, a fascist, calling up a Chabad Shliach that he's Jewish. He wants to learn Judaism. So he thought he's making a joke because that's what anti-Semites do. They like joking, they like mocking. So he hung up on him. He insisted, he called and he said, I am not making jokes. And finally he realized that this is real. He says, I want to meet you. And he meets him and he sees this is the man. And he tells him the story. He says, what am I supposed to do? So he looks him in the eyes and he says, listen, Judaism believes in tshuva. Judaism believes in return and repentance. You can transform your life. Now it's time to study, to discover your roots, and to create a new future for yourself. But one more thing. Real tshuva means not running away from the past, but transforming the past. So your tshuva is going to be when you will seize the opportunity and use all of your influence to fight anti-Semitism in Hungary. Everything you know about anti-Semitism and everything you did, you need to transform by using your position, your influence, your sphere of influence and impact to change that. This man at the age of 32 had a bris. He had a circumcision. He began learning Torah every single day with Rabbi Shlomo Kovish. Put on a talis cotton. He comes today 3 times a day to his shul to daven Shachris Mincha Maidev. The first few weeks when the Jews came into the shul and they saw who was standing there, they threw him out of shul. But after a few weeks, they calmed down and they accepted him. 1 year after this discovery, his grandmother dies. She's 93 years old and he decides it's time to go to Auschwitz. He goes to Auschwitz and he described it in an interview. He said, I was standing at the crematorium and suddenly he says, I quote, I burst out crying, I break down. I thought I'm standing by the graveside of my family, the people I never knew. I always claimed that the Holocaust was not bad. The Jews made a big story, they dramatized it. And here I was standing at the graveside of all of my ancestors who were murdered here. I want people to understand Jews. Anti-Semites don't understand who Jews are. They know nothing about Jews. Certainly he would know. He was one of them. His wife is now converting to Yiddishkeit according to halacha. All of his sons had a bris, they were circumcised. And he embarked on a mission to talk to schools, groups, colleges, anyone who will hear his story about the toxicity of anti-Semitism. He tells them why at the age of 17, feeling empty, pushed and empty, he needed something to believe in, and Jews were a great scapegoat. And this is what he talks about, that you will not create a good life for yourself by hating others. They asked him, what does your father feel about this? Remember, his father is the real non-Jew. He says, my father thinks I'm crazy. My father looked at me and said, why in the world would you want to be Jewish? Why in the world? Who needs this? And I told my father, it's not about what I want. It's about who I am. Besides, it's not a curse. It's a gift. He says, then I had to tell my father that I had a bris, I had a circumcision. I knew if I tell it to him regularly, he would literally kill me. So what did I do? Once we were on an airplane, and as we were landing, our seatbelts were fastened. I turned to him and I said, Daddy, I had a circumcision. I hoped that for the next few minutes, by the time the plane lands, he would calm down. And right then, he was in a seatbelt. The plane was landing. He wouldn't be able to beat the living daylights out of me. And I actually just read a few weeks ago, somebody sent to me that he's planning now to move to the Holy Land. Here you have an example of what Emunah Pshuta is. This did not come from a life of a person who was entrenched in Shas and Poskim, in Rishonim and Achronim, in Mesorah and Chazal, in Torah and Mitzvahs. Not only that, he dedicated his life to fight it. But you can't change the color of your soul. Your soul is essentially one with God, and therefore it experiences it. This is never afraid of intellect. It transcends it. Have a wonderful week. We'll see you next Thursday.
Yeah, I got it. Where Seichel ends and when it begins.
Yes. Yeah. Shalom Aleichem, how are you? Thank you for coming. I saw you also 2 weeks ago when you came for the astronomy, 5:30 in the morning. Thank you for coming. Bruchim Tiyo, I thank for coming.
Thank you, Rabbi Jacobson.
You're welcome. Likewise, thank you.
What a powerful story to wrap it up. Beautiful. Very powerful.
Thank you very much. I love it.
Sure, thank you. Thank you.
I'm still stuck with that question. What happened to the rabbis? Why did it end?
Which rabbis?
The rabbis saying that in the past, father saying, "Oh, I saw miracles. Where's the rabbis that we're finding nowadays with the miracles? What happened?
Maybe you don't have such tzaddikim. I don't know what's the. Every generation has But to base a Yiddishkeit on a moifas here and there,
I'm just asking what happened in that.
it's a good question. Not every generation has such tzaddikim.
If you're the terrorist, that question falls away. 100%. I'm just.
Skaya.
Maskim.
Sizzle.
Ja.
Scheuert.
Ja.
Ich hab es.
Und dank für die Suder Schleimer.
Ich hab es in der zweiten und der dritte Serie, jetzt ist schon sehr lang, von der ersten bis der zweiten.
Und noch einmal was?
Ich hab es zwischen der zweiten.
Also wie letzte Mal.
Nicht so lang.
Okay. Kalatata? Ja, Sedim ist Suder. Aber das ist Chazak also.
Leo Hartman.
Shalom Aleichem.
From Queens.
Shalom Aleichem.
I'm going to get Mr. Members of my but I heard you were speaking, so I wanted to come here.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you.
It was members good.
Thank
It was
you.
members, but are tapes available?
Yeah.
When-
They put it on the yeshiva.net.
.net.
The yeshiva.net.
The yeshiva.net.
The THE yeshiva.net. Just see it over there. In a day or two.
But it will be available here in a day or two?
CDs they make also. CDs are 3 days.
No.
You have internet.
What?
You have internet.
Yeah.
The yeshiva.net.
Now, I want to ask you a question.
You're welcome.
Again, what if the person comes along and says, my neshama doesn't talk to me? I heard that the secret is to become aware of it, but I explored it. I have to tell you, if a person comes along and makes that statement, my neshama does not talk to me. It's true that I'm a chilek of the Rebbeinu Shlom now, but I have to tell you, you know what? Again, I'm not talking for myself. I'm not doing it.
You can talk for yourself also.
But my neshama doesn't.
Right.
What would be, in your judgment, an approach to begin some kind of dialogue?
Right. No, I think that's again. I think that's a very legitimate and genuine question.
Right.
Person says it's all nice, but that itself I have to believe.
Right.
It's finished. I don't experience
exactly,
it.
Right.
That's the idea. That sometimes my ears could be plugged. I have ears, but I don't hear.
Right.
Sometimes that dimension of the soul is blocked. Sometimes the eyes of the soul, Emunah are the eyes of the soul. The eyes are blocked. And it often takes a lot of avodah to be able to remove the blockages. But when I remove them, the Emunah is always there. I don't have to create it. I don't need to create it.
So
what are things a person can do?
Yeah.
I think davening to Hashem for this, tefillah. I think Torah, especially Torah, I think like Torah that inspires people. Pnimiyus HaTorah, that speaks to the neshama. So Chlal Torah.
But again, what if the same person says, I tried davening, but davening doesn't talk to me?
No, I mean davening for this.
You mean to go ahead?
To daven for this. I don't mean just davening.
No, okay. But
To pray for this.
Okay.
To pray to be able to experience this. I think Torah, I think B'chlal mitzvahs are good for it, and I think a person who allows himself to spend time with himself in a very deep way. In mindfulness, I think a person who allows himself to meditate on this part of himself could get closer to it. Because, you know, the world is very, it's a tumult, it's very hard to reach it. But listen, everyone is on a journey.
Okay, I just want to get again
The yeshiva.net.
the yeshiva.
The yeshiva.net.
Yeshiva.net.
Regards of Shlomo the room world, antenna.
Ja.
Aber wenn du das Radrusche hier geht durch die Kirche als Bruder, sucht mir am Anfang herausbringen. Danach mit Klaus wissen, was ich tue. Als ich Menschen lernen, wir lernen und verstärken. Es geht schon an den Kopf. Ich kocht mir da die ganze Gedanke, ich bin das, als das anbringen in Herz, als das morgen ankommen in Herz.
Ja.
Look, the Kirche als Bruder, was hier hat, is amazing. It's
Dank.
greatly appreciated.
Thank you. Wie heißt du?
Ich habe es mal getan, aber.
Wird ihm geben ein gutes Siddiq, ja? Er ist ein guter Tenant.
Wait, do you have a card?
No. But you can write it down. You have a pen?
Rabbi Jacobson, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
When can I call you tonight? I have a very tough case that I need your advice on.
Whenever you want.
To when? I don't want to...
12,
Till
1.
12? Okay, good, thanks.
Teufels gewesen.
That's my question. And the Zai trying to crystallize the whole.
Thank you. You're not tired?
Huh?
I'm impressed that you're here.
If you do it a lot.
You do it a lot?
We get energy from
Du bist euch gewähnt?
Yeah.
Who's that gewähnt? In Hunters?
Win them.
Okay, first of all, this is the yeshiva that name.
Yeah, perfect. One word.
Inshallah.
When you say one word, what do you mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, this was that. And what's your telephone number or?
YYJacobson@AOL.com.
If Emunah is basically neshama, like Kalka Kalamal,
Well, let's repeat. Emunah is the experience of the Chalik Elikana naturally
express.
Emunah is the Eugen von der Neshama. The Neshama hat Eugen. Kavayach.
So in other words, without having this Emunah, I wouldn't have anything with my neshama.
Wouldn't
I
experience
wouldn't
it.
The nature of a Neshama is.
So in other words, let's say
Like a child knows who his mother is.
let's say I wake up tomorrow morning depressed, no interest in logic, no interest in anything, just suicide. And then whatever my thoughts are, I want to connect to this Emunah. How am I getting to it?
The Emunah is always there. No matter what, the Emunah is there. Sometimes I feel it, sometimes I don't feel it, but it's there.
But then
I can't say my mother is not my mother. My mother is my mother. Sometimes I feel it, sometimes I don't. There's always a relationship.
Isn't then a time that I need to have the Emunah that's called that
I don't have to have it, it's there.
So he's asking about the belief. He's asking about the
That's
belief.
we explained that there's no such a
Yeah.
thing.
Right, so
What's
So
belief? What
basically
does belief
try to
mean?
use the logic to get to experience the
The logic won't help you experience it. The logic just removes the blockages of logic on the Emunah. You understand? The
but
logic
if it's a
doesn't.
feeling, if it's anyway something not logic, then
It's not negay in the logic. I'm telling you, no. It's the husband of Chmatatata. I've stopped DNA to prove that he's a father.
That's a great model.
Is it going to be a stira? You want to bring DNA? Bring DNA. I don't care. You want to bring DNA? Bring DNA. I know I'm your father. I'm not afraid of questions.
but this wouldn't help the feeling why you feel this. Yeah.
It's going to be Moisef. Hey, you're going to bring DNA. Oh, now I love you. Tata, now give me a hug. It's going to be Moisef something.
Amazing motion.
It's not a stira. It's Eitmanish. Bring. I'm not afraid of your shilas. DNA will also prove it. If it's the truth, it's the truth. Ich darf es nicht. Emunah ist eine Sache. Akasha macht es nicht schwacher und a Teretz macht es nicht stärker.
Yeah.
Verstehst? Ob es eine secheldicke Sache. Ich weiß nicht, ob du bist mein Tate. Bring DNA, wird man sehen. Oh, hast du eine Reihe? Psst, moire dich. We proved without a doubt that this is a father.
Yeah, but if a true father and true son,
True
you bring
father,
DNA, it doesn't
it's going to be Moisef.
Yeah.
Now that there's DNA, oh, now I'm more convinced. Now there's taka no svekas by me. It's a mimbashay neminoi. It's not dezelfde Zach. It's not Moisef anything. Ich habe gehad of it mit der Mama. For somebody else, if I was adopted, if I'm a tinnik shenishba, yeah, this is it. I don't have anything else. You typhus.
Also, just to aggravate them, and
Nisas gesagt, harav hazeh mi goydelt vekusei b'Hashem kosavke.
I would never lamp shot like this. The mushal is very nice.
Aber das ist der MS. Ich sage dir der MS. Er sagt, Yesh Hashem b'kirbeinu im oyen. Well, Yesh Hashem b'kirbeinu im oyen.
I wanted to have
Like a Chazal bring this mashal, you know, that there was a father who took care of his son, and he was on his shoulder, and the animal came from the front, he put him in the back, came from the back, put him in the front, and then the son says, where's my father, where's my father? So that's when Amalek came. Oh, Amalek. Yeah? So the caliph comes to bite him. Hayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu im oyen. You grew up with a father, he saved your life 1,000 times. What's next to where's my father, where's my father?
So interesting.
But if you didn't grow up with a father, yeah, you say, do I have a father? So the Beis says, was willst du von Ayid? Will wissen. Verkehrt, he wants a father. That's why he's searching. Was willst du von ihm?
But this
No, that's why it was, the Rebbe given as a Einisch.
how come? How could this happen?
Das fragst du gute Scheile. Wie kann sein in der Mitte?
I've never seen a father that was so close to the son they should ask before.
That's a good question. That's a good, how did they taka do it?
It's a part of the lecture.
That's a good question. How do you understand all of it? You can ask on everybody, you can ask on Kairach, with the Meraglim, with the Messiah. Huh? So it's brought different pirushim. One pirush is, the question is, Hayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu imoyin. They wanted to know if Hashem is b'kirbeinu. That's already a different china. He's really b'kirbeinu, inside of me, inside my kishkas. Kravayim a kishkas, yeah. The chol krovay is shem katsha. Okay, so that's shouldn't be yurim of that.
I guess you need to come more to the morning.
Yeah.
Morning shiur for this.
Next to sheet.
Because the Torah state the question was if Hashem is the pchin of yesh or ayin. Hayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu im ayin. If getlichkeit is yesh or the getlichkeit is ayin. It's a shana. Tiffer a beer.
Mamushus, if it's
Yeah. If getlichkeit is yesh or the ayin. Another shayla. It's an edel shayla. Aber ob ich beschaut ist, habe ich gewinn a größer Chet, weil sie haben alles gesagt.
Darf ich verstehen, wo sie gehen später...
Ich gehe für deine Shaylas.
gewaltig.
Darf ich verstehen, wo sie gehen bei uns?
You can go skiing. It says post skiing. Skiing is da Chana. Hagam was geschrieben, dein Namen, aber ich habe nicht gewollt sagen, weil das muss dann...
Eine von der Kasches?
Ja.
Een school, wegen Einkommen gaat dat hier.
Nah, it was I wasn't even supposed to get an egg. I'm glad I came on that terrace, I guess.
Is wat in de hand?
Nein, ich gehe das Schier. Nach habe ich genommen, die Kasches, was haben gepasst mit der, ja. Sie haben die Dubne Magid. Die Dubne Magid, ja.
Man gaat in een week treffen das.
Nein, he said mit der Arrow, weißt du.
Könnt man geschossen nur
Man hat ihm gefragt, wie hast du am Marschel auf Hals? Er sagt, wenn ein Jid, was jede Arrow ist, gewinnt bei dir gemitten. Wie machst du das? Du kannst doch nicht schießen.
Könnt ihr geschossen?
Hat er gesagt, früher schieße ich. Und danach mache ich die. Ich hab früher am Marschel. Darf ich Zustand gefunden? Ich habe es am Eis Apostel. Ich gebe mir den Marschel. Es gaat teuer animatie. Ich habe angegeben mit den Schier.
Okay.
I want to thank also about the shiur before Purim.
That was
a major inspiration from the whole Purim.
very good shiur.
And Gewaldig.
Ja, dan was? Matanas Lavjoinen?
No, you're talking about shiur, I'm talking about another shiur. I'm talking about the morning before the Megillah Shabbat Hazov and everything.
Sharvet Hazov.
This was giving me like my Purim memories.
Nein, ich rede von
And we were talking about the
I was talking
shiur.
about this
Meer idea?
Oh, for the Becharsche woman, I think is this.
Ah,
That was a good shiur. I don't know where
now,
it was.
yeah.
Queens was that? That was in Queens?
Yeah, just now, right before.
Yeah.
Mir klinkt nog van een politie van Eve.
Ah, yeah, wegen pain.
Oh, there should be something like to update something. When we spoke once after a shiur about, I asked the guy if he would be find out he's a goy, if he become a Jew. So the guy told me it was whatever, he was giving me Muslim. So I asked him, what happens if you find out you're a goy and you become a Jew? So he's like, of course he answered, no, why? So I said, you say Shlossani goy every day. Hashem Chabanu, Ahavas Olam, Ahavarabba. You're lying to yourself. The guy thinks for a minute. It's just the update. The guy thinks for a minute. He says, you know what? You're right. I will have to rearrange my siddur. He meant it.
Interesting. Ja, slacha.
Ask the question.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It was powerful to hear something like all my questions answered.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
So I had this question for a while that I was speaking to the teacher and she told me that at some point I'm just going to have to accept. And even for this, I have to accept that my neshama is just going to feel it at some point, right? Because that's not something I could logically understand.
Well, there's two different dimensions. There's Judaism that you can understand. That's seichel. Emunah doesn't need understanding. Emunah is an experience of the soul.
Then there's Hashem. There's other things that be passed, like the passed down to us. So how do we know who to trust?
What?
That's about Hashem. There's certain things that we get passed down from our teachers. How do we know which teacher
That
to
you
trust?
can investigate. That you could use your mind.
There has to be one person that you could just believe everything that they say. Like let's say.
But that itself you can investigate based on what?
Like let's say the person who wrote Stormy Rabba Asito, that Rabba. So he said that you shouldn't investigate. And then if I just read that, I wouldn't know the other.
That's why you came to the shir.
Exactly, but before I came to this year, I would be believing that. Imagine
So that's why you're learning.
When I was 40, then I would have been believing the wrong thing.
You're right. That happens.
Not okay.
So I'm not supposed to be shutting down.
Then I'm not gonna. Then I can't trust anything because if I know that 40
You
years
could
down
trust
the line,
people who tell you that you can't trust them. Those are the people you trust.
so I tell you you can't trust them.
Yeah, the people that tell you you can't trust them, those are the people you trust.
Can I trust you?
No, in other words, no, I'm serious. People who tell you, research, see if I'm right.
But she told me that I must be fighting something, and that's why I'm not accepting anything she's saying. So what am I supposed to say? That like, what
Or maybe she's just insecure.
But she's, but she's a very nice person. She's not.
I'm not downing she's a
any
nice
of the
person.
abuse stories that you were telling us.
I'm not saying, I'm just saying.
So I shouldn't be shutting down my thinking, and I should be
Of course not, never.
thinking it.
Never shut down thinking, ever.
What are you supposed
If she makes sense, fine.
She's saying that at some point you're just going to have to accept it.
Accept what?
That they have to accept that my neshama is going to feel it. That I can't.
That you don't accept. That's an experience. You don't have to accept it.
Also,
If you're accepting it, it's not Emunah.
I said that
You're trained to think in an old way, so you didn't get this shear fully. You have to listen to it again.
we have to show these notes to that teacher.
Huh?
We have to show these notes to that.
You heard what I said? What I said just now, you didn't understand. You're still learning Emunah in the old way. That you have to.
So our whole school teaches that way. So what are we supposed to do? We should change to a different school?
No, your school is teaching one dimension, but you could grow more.
They're teaching Masorah. That's
Masorah is wonderful. So what? Nothing wrong with Masorah.
but then you don't know who to trust. Like, there's no person to tell you who to trust and who not to trust. And people say contradicting things.
So I could do something that I think is the right thing, what I personally understand, but at some point my understanding is going to reach a limit. There's certain things that you can.
You have to find somebody in life that you trust.
And there are people that people really, really trusted and then they ruin their lives.
So you have to be smart about it.
What about that Torah?
I don't know what that means. What do you mean by that?
Some people say that she's also very into this, that Das Torah, you just have to like be involved like yourself.
What if Das Torah is contradictory?
Exactly.
So what Das Torah?
So how are you supposed to know what Das Torah to follow?
And Surma Rav Asito was also Das Torah.
Listen, in Torah there's different views and perspectives. There's nothing wrong with arguments. Elu ve'elu divrei
So
Elokim
if I just
chayim.
read that, I would just shut down my brain and not ask any questions.
So that's a mistake.
But that's one of Ilu Ilu.
No, so that's what this commentator, that's what Bnei Yissaschar says, that he's writing to somebody who sees God. Again, if you grow up with your father and you start saying, oh, bring me DNA to prove it, right? It's ridiculous. But if you didn't grow up with your father, that's his point. That's why today you can't say that.
She's very into being with Vatal yourself, but it's true that there is a concept of Bittul in Yiddishkeit.
There's a big concept of bittul, but bittul doesn't mean that you have to suppress your mind.
So we said that Judaism doesn't say that there's not an answer for anything, but we're not supposed to ask questions from form aspirations. What do you think?
Well, there's certain things that we don't know. I mean, there's certain things we'll never understand. That's fine.
So that's the same thing that all these people who said there's no answers to this, or Jude doesn't ask those questions. That's the same thing.
No,
that
because
there are some things that we don't understand.
no, that's fine. That's a legitimate thing. We don't know a cure for Alzheimer's. We don't have a cure for all cancers. We're not sure what makes cancer. So that means we shouldn't try to figure out what we could figure out. There's things we can't figure out. I'm saying we have to realize that in reality, there are a lot of things we don't understand. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to understand what we could understand. There's plenty that we could understand. Why shouldn't we understand that? Why should Jews accept 630 mitzvahs?
But the more knowledge that you gain, the more you realize you don't know. So
But it's different. It's because a different type of knowledge. There's a knowledge, there's ignorance that comes from knowledge. That's a whole different type of knowledge, a whole different type of ignorance.
So then, but it just ends up.
It's like saying I'm not going to know anything about myself because I'm never going to figure out myself completely. You won't figure yourself out completely, but there's a lot you could know and control.
Like if I would have trusted before asking any question, I probably would have trusted better. Now that I'm asking questions and figuring out more knowledge, it like sort of takes away from the trust.
Or makes you more normal and rational.
But she said that's not the right thing, so you should be tapping into her Shita, and if you're not, then...
So what if you grew up in a Muslim home?
That's what I said.
What would they say? The same thing.
She said that you were at Har Sinai, so you feel that's right.
But you weren't at Har Sinai. You don't know that you were at Har Sinai. They also say they feel it.
Right.
So what do we practically do? I still don't understand I totally understand the question. I don't understand the answer.
What's the problem?
The problem is we're being told to about our Sicha, and if we're not...
I can't speak for that teacher. You can ask me what I said.
So what is the answer? Like,
To what question?
What are we supposed to do? How do we tap into the relationship with Hashem? We said it's the color of your soul. Thank you very much. I don't necessarily feel it.
Which school do you go to?
Or like maybe I can make myself feel things, but a Muslim can also make.
Don't make it. Which school do you go to? Where?
It's the most wide-minded school.
I have no problem. I know it's a beautiful school. Don't worry. It's wonderful. You enjoy it there, right?
Yeah.
So great.
It's amazing, but I still want to get to the core of this. How do I know what to believe and who to trust? Yeah.
We're real teenagers, I know.
You could trust me.
He wants to ask a short question.
If je kan me aanvoelen, kan je nog finish?
Ja.
Als mijn zoier is heilig van de terrets van min. Min is hij de bereid zaak, aber heilig van die soort dat zijn mijn zoier. Van dort heit man nu. So teachers gerecht, man hebt hem tzies mit rein. Hebt uns mit Kaviar von den Eltern, aber noch ein Tracht rein tief. Wie das Tracht, man wusste, dass sie tzies mit rein, wusste das verkauft, no?
Ja, sei gut.
So it is part of the answer. Nothing. It's really part of the answer. How? Masoyer should be the base of your iman.
Why indeed?
Once you have the base,
That's a good shiloh. That's a separate sheet.
Oh, so it's how to learn the Masoyer. It's Mitzrayim, but not.
Whose laser?
An Irish massa. It's a massa with a great yes.
They the lasers?
Yeah. Just
Thank you very much. Everything worked out?
I do believe it, but I want to know why.
Why should you believe the massa from Mitzvah Mitzrayim? Because millions of people were there. Mashak Mahmoud, nobody saw.
Exactly, but that's what we just said. You should answer the question.
So, can I ask? Okay, so I have my daughter's asking always, what's het aan when Mashiach gaat komen? En ooit Mashiach komt nicht. So she's on 6,000 Yud, then ze zich de welt ibedrein, and she's really afraid. Like she can really get palpitations from that, from those thoughts. And we do try to,
I gave a shir once and I'll send it to you. Send me an email.
I don't.
You don't have email? Does she have email?
No, she's 11 years old.
Oh. So you have to get a CD. Does he have a friend who has email?
Okay, try.
Yeah.
Send me a friend's email and they'll make a CD for you. A CD she could listen to. Just she should write on it what you need about Mashiach and I'll send it.
Where should, I don't know where to.
Tell her to write an email to yyjacobson@aol.com. yyjacobson@aol.com. Say it then.
Yes. Thank you so
Atzlucha,
much.
no problem. Thank you for coming. Yeah.
I really enjoyed your share.
Thank you.
I wanted to know if you could maybe make more like for teenagers and I know I have friends that would really enjoy this.
Why don't they come? We're gonna have next Thursday.
Yeah, and could you have teenagers in mind, would you be able to make a share specifically?
Next Thursday night again.
Different standards and